Hello, my fellow nerds, Kolko here. And episode 3 of season 2 of Hell of a Boss gave us a lot of very interesting information. But the thing that stood out to me the most was Crimson here. Vivzy has stated quite a few times that Hell has a very strong hierarchy, and that imps are the lowest of the low on that hierarchy. So I found it especially interesting that Crimson, an imp, is head of the mafia, lives in a very rich estate, and bosses around other Hellborn creatures that are very likely higher than him on this hierarchy ranking. Did Vivzy forget her own theory? Or is there something more to this? That is what I'm going to address on today. First, let's take a look at what we learned about Greed Society. Greed Ring seems to be based on stereotypically pure, unfiltered capitalism. We have what we call negative externalities, just things like environmental pollution. We see this everywhere. Factory outlines and smogs can be seen throughout the green sky in Greed. Slime from pollution covers everything, even Crimson's mansion. In the first few minutes we see of the Greed Ring in this episode, we see piles and piles of litter and imps dumping radioactive waste into rivers, and we see all kinds of industry and pollutants intermixed in residential areas. Mammon appears to be an oligarch, owning all the banks, gas, oil, Lululand, etc. So this is very stereotypical capitalism. But because it's stereotypical capitalism, this is how an imp, the lowest of the low according to Vivzy, can have a mansion like this. Crimson likely moved to Greed from Wrath, bringing his wrath-like tendencies with him to a place where they would stand out, which is why Moxie probably says he was born in Wrath. The residents of Wrath, as seen from Millie and Sally Mae, who have a neighborhood head count, tend to have unprecedented levels of strength, intimidation, and violence. Crimson likely used his violent tendencies in a place where the biggest crime was likely theft and extortion, and used his violence to intimidate other Hellborn into working for him. Or there was a chance that he could have rallied all these other Hellborn under the mantra of, oh, we can make something of ourselves and don't have to be lower class or something, but it's very likely the former. But the main question I have is, why is this allowed to happen? If Hell really is a hierarchical, feudal society, shouldn't Mammon or one of his servants be crushing Crimson with species or class-based policies? Because that's how feudalism works. Mammon could also literally crush Crimson with his minions too. Why is Crimson, who should be the lowest of the low, allowed to have helicopters and stuff that not even demons higher than him have? Given the assumption that Vivzy isn't just bad at portraying classism and oppression, we have 3 theories that kind of all tie together. The first theory is the sinful societies, or basically that every ring of hell has societies based on sin. More specifically, how much of said sin in whatever ring you live in you can commit. This theory would state that it doesn't matter who you are, just whoever can commit the most sin gets to be the highest in society. For example, in Lust, the hottest and sluttiest rule. In Wrath, it's the toughest. In Pride, it's how well you can market yourself and stand out against people like sinners. Basically, Pride is Los Angeles. But this theory kind of runs into a dead end when you see that a lot of species tend to stay in their class. Like, imps still tend to be in working and service roles. In the Pride and Wrath ring, Blitzo's work is still seen as revolutionary, and feudalism and classism is very prevalent, especially in places like Pride and Lust. But I do believe that some elements of this theory still work, it's just tied with feudalism, or at least in some of the rings. Which brings me to my next theory, that the Greed Ring is a revolutionary system based on pure capitalism. Perhaps the Greed Ring runs on the other capitalist stereotype that it doesn't matter what you are as long as you have the money. I'm not going to give my personal opinion on that, but this is where Karl Marx comes in. It is likely that Greed Society is based on Karl Marx's view of capitalism. Now, I bet you weren't expecting to hear something along those lines. Come on, Kolko, really? You're gonna bring political theory into this? Hey, I'm not condoning or promoting any ideology here. I'm gonna note that there's gonna be some political theory and talks of Marxism in here, and that these don't really necessarily reflect my views. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with anything here. This is all precisely what I learned in policy and history school. This is just me actually using my degree. I'm just taking a look at Karl Marx's writing and showing how similar his beliefs are to how the greed ring runs. I'm not accusing anyone of promoting a specific ideology, I'm just making connections. It's going to be a lot less controversial than you think, because contrary to popular belief, Karl Marx actually said a lot of good things about capitalism, especially given its predecessor, feudalism, where everyone was locked into place for the rest of their lives. A serf couldn't simply become a lord back in the day. Back when Marx was growing up, there were no laws about wages, child labor, worker safety, minimum wage, etc. There were a lot of really horrible practices that went on when Karl Marx was doing his writings. Feudalism was even still happening in places like Russia at the time. There weren't any social programs or any kind of socialistic tendencies or anything regarding those lines at the time. Welfare came later, but that's actually something Marx hated. But I'm talking about this because this is what we see in a lot of Hell. Stolas has to marry into his family. Stolas screwing an imp is seen as scandalous. Everyone at Ozzy's is separated by species or class. Blitz starting a business is something that's very shocking to a lot of people. Imps and hellhounds can be literally bought in some cases. It's very similar to feudalism. But capitalism was the first system where people could actually change their social class. Some people have to work much harder, but they can still rise in the ranks. This was something that Marx noted as totally revolutionary. This mostly began after the Black Plague. A lot of people died, and a lot of Europe was left in total chaos and disorder. But when things were getting back into order again, a lot of peasants had passed away, meaning there was a lot more work than was previously expected. And a lot of peasants decided, no, I'm not doing it. Or no, I'm not going to work in plague-like conditions. Because there weren't a lot of other people left, the lords had no choice but to reward the peasants with higher pay, higher freedoms, or even land or new titles in some cases. And that was just the first spark of capitalism. Given that this is Hell, there's probably no socialism or communism aspects really anywhere. I highly doubt that any of Hell's society actually has anything to take care of its citizens. I mean, just look at everything we see. Insurance doesn't even exist. Also, Marx believed that socialism and communism were the final stages of society, but that societies can't just jump from feudalism to socialism without going through capitalism. Too Long Didn't Read, Marx believed that capitalism was exploitative, but a necessary evolution from feudalism. So compared to the rest of feudalist Hell, the greed ring is probably seen as revolutionary. It's probably seen as a place where anyone can make it. In the Pride Ring, Moxie and Millie live in a crumbling apartment building, while all the houses in Not a Mafia Town look like upper middle class houses, if not McMansions. Compared to the feudalist aspects everywhere else, this seems to be one of the freest systems we have seen in Hell. But that still doesn't answer the question of how does Mammon allow a lowly imp to do all of this? And that leads to the third part of this video. Why is it that Mammon hasn't overly taxed the hell out of Crimson, or quashed him and forced him back to being to the working class with the other imps? It seems like Mammon himself is an oligarch, owning all the banks, oil, gas, everything. And I don't think he's necessarily okay with this. But the mafia isn't exactly part of everyday legal society. Either Crimson here is committing some mad tax evasion, or Mammon is one of those people that believes taxation is theft. There are two options here. Either Mammon doesn't know any of this is going on, or Mammon just doesn't care and or respects people like Crimson for starting his own business and accumulating such wealth. It all depends on whether Mammon is literally trying to hoard as much money as possible, or if he's a true ANCAP at heart. There is evidence for both, so let's go over that. The first theory is that Mammon has no idea this is going on, and or tried to crack down on the mafia in the past. We see the mafia robbing banks. Banks with Mammon's logo on it. I don't think that's exactly something he'd be happy about. The town is called Not a Mafia Town, as if it's some kind of big cover-up. On Crimson's mantle, there are absolutely no parts from the clown demons that we saw at Ozzy's in episode 8, which are very likely to have come from the greed ring. There are bullet holes in the side of the walls of Crimson's mansion, showing that either gang fights were there or someone was trying to take him out. Crimson has a plethora of bodyguards. Moxie actually goes to jail for robbing that bank. And this might be a stretch, but here Blitz kind of looks surprised that an imp lives in such a big house. Again, that might be speculation though. We also have a lot of evidence that Mammon just wants pure capitalism in the greed ring, and or just doesn't care about the mafia. Or Crimson has enough money to just bribe him to go away. The most important being Crimson's presence. He has a big flashy McMansion and a helipad outside of his house. If he were trying to lay low, that is a terrible way to do it. He has no shame in just walking around. He's not constantly looking over his shoulder. There's no message saying, come alone, don't tell anyone, or whatever. He doesn't even try to disguise his voice when he's calling Blitz. Unlike all the other imps we've met, he doesn't seem too impressed about Blitz starting his own business, more that he's just making a name for himself. We see in some other pictures that other rich imps exist in this ring. There seem to be other imp mafiosos from other gangs. He puts on big, flashy ceremonies and is confident. Again, things that people laying low normally shouldn't and wouldn't do. His car is super flashy, and if he were to go anywhere in public with that car, he would be immediately pointed out. An imp with that kind of car in public would be immediately questioned. And, of course, he murders higher-level Hellborn without being caught and questioned. So at the end of the day, Crimson is allowed to get away with this because either Mammon doesn't care or respects him, or Mammon just doesn't know, and is really, really oblivious to the fact that an imp owns a fucking helicopter. But that's all the theories I have on the greed ring for today. Please let me know in the comments what you think is going on with the greed ring. I'm really eager to hear what you guys have to say about it, because this is a really interesting topic for me. But until then, keep on studying.